We are all set to go. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. As we get into this webinar, just want to give you a brief overview of the agenda and what we're going to be looking at tonight. So first, we're going to do some quick introductions, and then we're going to do the quick kind of do's and don'ts, the eat this, don't eat this recipe cookbook for recruiting with kind of four main buckets around coach communication, recruiting exposure, showcases and tournaments, and then kind of a general recruiting bucket. And then we'll also, at the end, dedicate as much time as possible to a live Q&A. So as questions pop up, if you have a follow-up on something that we're saying, certainly shoot that over into the question portal of the GoToWebinar, and I'll be collecting those, and then I'll be farming those out to either Justin or myself at the end there. So first up, some introductions. Justin, could you please give yourself a quick little intro?
Yeah, so I, as you see on the screen there, went to Amherst College many years ago, played two sports, football and baseball at Amherst, graduated and then got into college coaching. So I did 6 years of coaching college, assistant coach and recruiting coordinator at Amherst, Boston College, and UNC Asheville, and was a head coach at Division III Shenandoah for 3 years after that, before getting hired by Brendan Sullivan at Headfirst to devise the college consulting, college advising program at the time, and coach the Gamers program and help them with the honor roll camps. Did that for 6 great years. And then in 2011, 13 years ago now, 13 and a half, I started DCAT in South Carolina. I am the president and founder of DCAT. So I've basically been doing college advising for 20 years since college coaching.
Awesome. Thank you, Justin. And thank you, as always, for sharing a part of your evening and certainly sharing that expertise that you have built up over those 20 years or so on both sides of the recruiting desk, as it says there, as a student athlete, as a coach, and now as a recruiting consultant on that side of things as an advisor. My name is Max McKenna.
My pleasure, man.
I'm a senior manager marketing here at Headfirst Showcase Camps. I also, once upon a time, went to Amherst College where I played baseball. After my career there, went into teaching and coaching for a few years, first at Phillips Andover Academy up here in Massachusetts, and then at a small private school outside New York City called the Masters School. Came back to Headfirst full-time in 2014, recently finished up a stint away from Headfirst, but have recently restarted back full-time with the Headfirst crew. And over those years with Headfirst, I've really spent a lot of my time working hands-on with this division, working with our showcase camps, but then also talking a lot with college coaches about their recruiting process and with our families and student athletes about how they are navigating the recruiting process. So happy to bring some of those things that I've learned over the last 10 or so years to bear here as well. And then Justin, you mentioned DCAT. Could you give a brief overview of what it is that DCAT does when you work with student athletes?
Sure. Yeah. So essentially, we are advisors that act as personal coaches for your sons on all facets of the college recruiting process, teaching what to, how to, when to, why to do all the things that need to be done in the process in order to maximize college options and get to a great holistic fit. We're very serious about customizing our program to the individual student athlete based on their profile as a player and as a student, rather than giving generic cookie cutter advice. And we advise really on all things pertaining to the life of a student athlete, ranging from college list creation to showcase planning to visit scheduling to diet analysis to academic advisement to helping with all college coach communication and helping families understand the systems of pull that we talked about a little bit in the last webinar that various highly selective institutions have. So that's the nutshell.
Awesome. Thank you, Justin. And again, thank you for being on this evening. And with that, let's get into the do's and don'ts. And you'll see that each of these are phrased pretty straightforwardly. There's do's and then there's don'ts. And we'll kind of tackle them in that order. So first up is coach communication. So when it comes to the do of coach communication, one really important thing is to personalize every communication touch point that you have with a college coach. One thing that a college coach told me a number of years ago was if you aren't getting responses to emails, there's a very good chance that it is because it doesn't come across as personalized enough. It comes across as generic, or like you sent the same email to a bunch of different coaches And so it doesn't necessarily warrant a personal response from a college coach. It's super, super important that you personalize every communication touch point. This, yes, absolutely means get the name of the coach right, get the name of the school right, get the mascot right. But beyond that, the other thing that I like to talk about with personalizing coach communication is also, what is this school, why does this school align with what you want to do? If you're emailing Caltech and you're saying, I'm really excited for a degree in liberal arts, that's not personalized to that institution because that is not where Caltech's specialty is, right? So, but if you're emailing Babson, you say, I'm really interested in Babson because I'm super interested in this entrepreneurship program that they have built out. I'm looking to start my own business, X, Y, and Z. That's a great personalized touch point. So not just get the coach's name right, like it's a mail merge, but also, why is this school appealing to you at this time? Why do you have interest in this program? Next up on the do, you want to create non-email touch points. Email is going to be, especially when you start it up, is going to be a really important foundation and basis for your communication with college coaches. The marginal cost of sending an email is zero. So you have the ability to send these email touch points and really get into people's inboxes. But you also do want to create non-email touch points. You can do something old school, like sending a handwritten letter. Email inboxes now very crowded. Mailboxes a lot less crowded than they used to be. So you can kind of stand out that way. Eventually, as you gain interest from college coaches and as you progress the relationship and the recruiting process at some of your target programs, you're going to progress from email into phone calls and texting. A lot of this will be driven by the coach's preference for how they want to communicate. Some coaches will say, I want to talk with you on the phone once a week to talk about where you're at and what your grades are looking like, what your latest test scores are, et cetera. Or some are going to want to say, hey, let's stay in touch via text because that's the simplest and the easiest. I think more and more coaches are certainly using text very heavily in their recruiting process as well. And then also, and we'll touch a little bit about this later on, it's certainly an area of interest, but you can use social media as well, especially Twitter or X. You can use some presence there to create a brand, put some of your video out there, put some stats out there, tag coaches and stuff, send them some DMs, all of that as well. So use those judiciously and responsibly, but you certainly can create non-email touch points through social media platforms as well. The one that I hear coaches using most frequently is Twitter. I would also say, there's going to be a bunch that are on Instagram, or they might be on TikTok, probably a little less relevant for the recruiting side of things, but I think Twitter and Instagram could be good points of presence for you as you kind of build out your digital storefront. And then also you're going to want to create non-baseball specific touch points. Are you doing things like extracurriculars? Are you doing volunteer work? Are you really active in the chess club? Are you, the student body president or something like that? You want to give coaches a sense of not just who you are on the field, but also in the classroom, and then also outside of both. You want to give them a sense of who you are as a leader, give them a sense of your character, because ultimately they're recruiting a holistic player. They want you to contribute to their baseball program. They want you to be a good student in their institution, but they also want to know who it is that they're going to be in the dugout with, in the locker room with, on those bus trips with as well. So you want to also create some non-baseball specific touch points for them too. And then finally, it's last, but is certainly, I think, one of the most important, which is why it's in all caps, you have to proofread. You have to proofread. This is where all those personalized touch points, let's make sure that they're right? You don't want to send an email to a coach that has a different coach's name. That's a great way to get that email deleted instead of read and, sent straight to the garbage instead of replied to. So proofread every single thing. And parents, this is where you can also be a good resource. We want the emails to be written by student athletes. These coaches are going to be able to tell if it was written by, a lawyer who has 35 years of litigation experience versus a high school senior or junior. So you want to make sure that it is coming from and written by the student athlete. But this is a place where you can certainly tag in and make sure that the name is right, that the name of the school is right, the coach name's right, the mascot's right, you're sending it to the right person, all these things. It reads smoothly, it doesn't have typos, all those things. So certainly proofread. I can't tell you how many times I've heard stories from coaches about getting an email that's sent to them, but it says a different coach's name on it, or it says, hey, coach at, Amherst, I'm really interested in going to Williams, or whatever the case may be. Justin, do you have any other do's that you would put in here on the coach communication front?
I mean, I think those are great points. 3 or 4 big do's for me on the coach communication front. One, do continually demonstrate interest. This cannot be understated, okay? I think many times players make the mistake of believing a coach knows that they're interested just because they reached out once or twice. Unfortunately, that's just not how it works, okay? That doesn't mean you reach out every day or even every week of the process, but there are different ways that you can demonstrate your interest throughout, and it is critical to do so. Do not assume anything. I always say that assumption is a killer in the process. Certainly don't assume that a coach just thinks you're interested. Okay, you have to demonstrate that interest. Having been a coach and having talked with a lot of coaches, I can't tell you the number of times that I've heard them say, not really sure how interested he is, right? We don't hear from him much. He's not as responsive as he should be, and that can be an absolute dagger in the process. 2, questionnaires. Do fill out recruiting questionnaires, prospect questionnaires. That goes sort of in line with what I was just saying in terms of demonstrating interest. Questionnaires are really kind of funny and quirky, I think, in the process, because you could, as a aspiring player, right, you're recruiting yourself to the coaches, you could reach out 10 different times expressing interest. But if you have not filled out that online recruiting questionnaire, the coach won't think you're interested. Okay. So especially for you juniors, as you get to the end of junior year, you're in exams or they're upcoming here in the next couple of weeks. One of the very good things that you'll want to start doing, especially by early June, is filling out online recruiting questionnaires to go with any overtures of interest that you send out. Okay. Yes, they're monotonous. Yes, they're boring. Yes, it's data entry, but yes, they do in fact matter a lot to college coaches. Don't ask me why, but many of them will use that as the first sort of indicator of sincere interest. 3, do engage proactively. Okay, it's simply put, it's not a good option to have others engage for you in this process and you, the student athlete, not engage at all. Okay, Max talked about the personalization, various touch points, etc. Proactive personalization is really important, right? Don't wait. Don't sit around and wait for the phone to ring. Go out and lead your process and become your point man. And then lastly, 4, do, when possible, finish an email with a question. Okay? I'm a big believer in, you don't want to hammer them with volume in multiple emails and have them coaches read a book every time they're opening an email. But anytime you can answer into email with a question such as, Coach, I see you were not listed as having a camp yet this summer at your school. Do you have any plans for that? And if so, what might those dates be so I could look at potentially attending? A lot of times coaches are going to get back to players that ask questions about camps for obvious reasons, right? But really what that's doing by, when possible, and when it makes sense, ending an email with a question, is it gets the process from the generalized global communication to a more personalized and intimate level, which is really an overarching theme or tactic for any player in the process, trying to get it from, man on the moon to back and forth, on a personalized level.
Absolutely. And just to double down on that questionnaire standpoint as well, a lot of coaches will use the list of folks who have submitted for those recruiting questionnaires. They'll use those to inform the list of when they're inviting to their own specific prospect camps. So to make sure you are in touch with the prospect camps at the schools that you're interested in, that's another really important reason to sign up for those questionnaires, so that coaches know that, that you're on their email list basically as well. For the don'ts, a lot of these don'ts will parallel the one from up top. So don't mass email, mail merge, or BCC. You don't want to send a depersonalized email that says, "Dear coach, I'm interested in your program because I'm good at baseball," right? You want to make sure that everything is personalized. If you're going to personalize every communication touch point, as we said above, then that means that it is not going to be a mass email. You're not going to do a mail merge, and you certainly don't want to just BCC a bunch of coaches and send them all the same email all at once. So definitely avoid that. It cuts directly against personalizing communication touch point. and demonstrating that interest, as Justin mentioned, in a program. Second is you don't want to pester over email. Now, Justin said be persistent, and we'll kind of keep touching about that. Be proactive, be persistent without pestering. And so this is one that a lot of student athletes and parents, we get a lot of questions about this because it is kind of tough to find that balance where you want to be proactive, you want to follow up, and you want to be persistent, but you also don't want to be pestering a coach. You don't want to be the person who's emailing them every single day. And the tricky part about this is that there's no kind of heuristic or no single rule that follows for everybody. It says email no more than once a week and no less than once a month, right? That's not, unfortunately, quite how it works. It's going to be different in each unique case, depending on the coach, depending on the program, depending on the player, depending on where they are in their recruiting process, depending on where you are on their board, all these things. A general rule that I have, which again is not kind of hard and fast, but a general rule that I have is you want to have a reason to be emailing. If you have an updated video, if you have an updated test score, if you have, a new tournament schedule that you set for the summer, those all could be really good reasons. If you're just emailing to say, hey, coach, it's Tuesday. I told you I'd email every Tuesday, so here's your email for Tuesday. That's not a reason to email a coach. So if you have something to update them on, then you could be in a good place. But again, it's not kind of this hard and fast rule for this because it does depend on the player, on the circumstance, where you are in recruiting, et cetera. And then you also do not want to give up. This is super, super important. And I'll let Justin speak to this in a little bit more detail, but if you don't hear back from coaches, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are interested, especially depending on what time of year you're emailing them. If you're emailing them right now and they're headed into their conference tournament, great, they have other stuff going on. Or if you email them in the heart of the summer when they're out on their recruiting trail, they're bouncing back and forth between tournaments in Hoover and showcases in Long Island and all sorts of stuff. They're bouncing between hotel rooms. So there's plenty of good reasons other than they aren't interested that they might not be getting back to you. So it's about kind of finding that timing in the cycle and understanding that each program is going to function a little bit differently, but don't give up just because you haven't heard back from a coach. And then finally, my last one is don't ignore or blow off any coaches who email you. If a coach is interested in you and reaches out to you, and this doesn't mean, necessarily like one of those camp invites that sounds kind of generic and says, all right, maybe this is going out to a bunch, hundreds or thousands of different student athletes in my grad year. But if a coach sends you a one-off email saying, hey, Max, I'm really interested. I saw you play at this or that tournament. I'd love to talk to you about our program. Don't ignore or blow those off for a handful of really, really important reasons. One is that you never know how your recruiting process is going to evolve. So if you hear from a coach at a school and you think, I'm not really interested in that school, as you go through the process, it might turn out that as you learn more and more about that school or about that program or about that coach, it could end up being the perfect fit. And so you want to make sure that you aren't shutting any of those doors before you know, right? And so because those might end up being the right fit, you don't want to ignore them now and risk that later on. Another part is coaches talk to each other. And so one key thing is if you're sitting in a dugout at one of our showcases, you hear coaches sometimes talk about players. And it's like, hey, what's your take on this Max McKenna kid? And if you were rude to a coach or if you blew a coach off, they're talking amongst each other and that could get around, right? And so you want to make sure that you kind of maintain a good relationship and a good reputation among the college coach community because you never know who's friends with who. These coaching trees work all over the country, across conferences, across divisions. And so a coach, just because you think that you don't want to play at Vassar, that doesn't mean that Coach Fuque doesn't know someone who's coaching at your dream school. And you want to make sure that Coach Fuque has good things to say about you as well. Justin, any additions or thoughts on the don'ts here?
Yeah, to triple down on what Max just said, don't give up. I can't be more serious about this, and it is something that I've seen really kill a lot of processes because, look, it's natural to want to throw in the towel when you, as a player, reach out to coaches many times and don't get response. Unfortunately, radio silence is a big part of this. It happens. There's going to be many times where you do everything right and you're not seeing the fruits of your labor. You're not getting just basic feedback from coaches. persistence, as Max talked about, is key. I always talk to players about walking that line between being persistent and annoying. And as Max very correctly outlined, there's no exact way to do that, right? And it's a fine line. It's one I help all my advisees, all of our advisees walk. But persistence to me is very arguably the most important piece of this process. Calvin Coolidge, president, I say this anywhere I go and do a speaking engagement. He said, nothing in this world will or can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. There's nothing more common than unsuccessful people with talent. Persistence in this I've seen very moderately talented players who know who they are as players and know they might not be the first wave of recruits and offerees from college coaches, persist, right, and win and get to a great school where they are on a roster and even in many cases earn assistance in admissions. So that radio silence, it's really important to mean that it's not over, and just because you get it doesn't mean it's the end of the road with schools. Again, the number one thing I see is, okay, kid sends out an email that I tell them to send out, make sure it's, as Max mentioned, personalized and not a mass email. They don't get a response, but from, say, a few. And their mindset is to, okay, well, those are the only ones then that are actually interested. Well, first of all, just because they emailed you back, that doesn't even equate to genuine or legitimate interest necessarily. It could, but it's a kiss of death to say, okay, I'm only going to engage with these 3 out of my 20 because their lack of response literally can and often does mean nothing, especially early. I mean, if you're a junior, in my mind, it's still very early in this process. I always say the quote sprint phase of it starts June 1st and goes for 5 months, right? Or up to that amount of time. So if you do you and you continue your persistence as if you're having a conversation that where they are replying back to you, if that's your mindset that you're going to continue that conversation, you're going to be fine. And at some point they might say no, right? Not interested. Okay, move on. But if they say nothing, it's not a no yet. So it could be a maybe, and it could be one of 15 things that is the reason for their lack of response. Could be laziness, lack of organization. Could be because they have 48 other things they're doing right now. Could be because that one email that you just sent didn't really interest them, but 3 emails down the road where you sent a video clip of you hitting an opposite field double catches their eye, and they want to get on the phone with you. Okay, so that's why that persistence is key. So do not throw in that towel. Couple others for me. Don't check email only once in a while. This has become more and more of a peeve for me in the last few years because today's generation, my sons included, y'all want to text. Okay, fine. Guess what? You must check your email every day. I had to get into a kid who's a junior the other day because he'd gone a week and a half without checking his email. Sure enough, when he finally did, there were outdated emails in there that he should have returned to college coaches and didn't. So you're automatically sending a message, I'm not very interested in you. And we already established you need to demonstrate interest. Not a good plan. Couple other ones. Do not send a laminated wrestling photo from when you were 12 years old to me as a college coach. Okay? This actually happened. You laugh, you're going, what is this dude talking about? I was a head coach at Shenandoah my first year, 2001, 23 short years ago. I literally in the mail got a stack of laminated wrestling photos for a baseball player who wanted me to appreciate that he won the world. I don't know what he won in wrestling, but it was both hilarious and both scary at the same time. Why do I bring that story up? Not because I think the audience is sending laminated wrestling photos, but the point is don't send out outdated or irrelevant information or videos, okay? If you are in May of your junior year, you should not be sending videos from October. Period, end of story. Because if you have done what you're supposed to do over junior year, you should be very different physically. Your skills should be sharper, and you should be better. So why are you showing me an old version of yourself where you hit a double? It doesn't help. You need to be current and forward thinking in that regard. And then lastly, I always say don't try to make sense of this recruiting process in a linear way or as an algebraic equation. A plus B does not equal C almost all the time in the recruiting process, okay? In other words, there's a very subjective element to college baseball recruiting that doesn't exist in sports like track or swimming or golf, or a number or a time or whatever dictates what level you'll be recruited at. Yes, objective measurements, right? Data matters a lot in baseball, and it matters ever more in the last decade. But always in baseball, there is a very important subjective component to this, which is simply states, I, the college coach, am going to determine what I want and what I need based on what I see with my own eyes. Okay, so yes, all the data matters, et cetera, but very rarely are you going to get recruited just because your exit velocity was 96. Doesn't mean you can necessarily hit, right? So you have to understand that if you're trying to make sense of this as, if I hit this fast, hit this exit velocity, or hit this well, or pitch this velocity, if I run this fast, therefore I will be recruited. That's not the way to look at this, okay? And you also don't want to compare yourself to others and try to deduce where you should be in the process based on where they are. Because again, what one coach sees and likes, another might not. What one coach sees and needs, another might not. They might like you as a player, and many times over I've heard college coaches say, and I've said myself, you can play for me at my level, except I don't need you. We don't need a catcher this year. Or I need you to be left-handed. You can rake. You're probably better than three guys in my lineup, but I got to have a left-handed bat. Sorry. Okay. So, that one sort of final takeaway note here with that. This recruiting process, especially for juniors who are in the thick of it, the 2025 class that's listening, it's hard. There's times where you feel like you're getting nowhere, where you're beating your head against the wall. Again, like I said earlier, you're doing everything right. You're getting crickets back. Know this. I've done this for 20 years. This process can change and hinge on a dime. In an instant, you can literally go, and I've seen it countless times, from nowhere feeling like you're in quicksand up to your neck to all of a sudden you go to a Headfirst whatever, or you have a good day, or you send a good video. All of a sudden you got 3 offers 3 days later. And you're going, what just happened? Okay. It doesn't always happen, but it can, and it shouldn't be a surprise if it does, especially if you've been proactive along the way to do everything in your power to put your best foot forward.
Absolutely. Next up, we're moving into getting the do's and don'ts of getting recruiting exposure. So again, do-don't format. Do actively seek out and plan for opportunities that give you targeted exposure to the schools on your list. So one important thing here is that obviously this depends on what the schools that are on your list, right? So everyone's plan does look different, but it is important to have a plan. As Justin said before in coach communication about proactivity, the same thing holds true here. You want to be proactive in setting a plan and going out to attack the opportunities that put you in front of the coaches that at programs that you're interested in. Otherwise, you risk just being purely reactive, and you get an invite to a camp here and you say, oh man, I'm going to miss out if I don't go here, or this tournament that may or may not benefit my recruiting, but if I'll feel like I'll have this FOMO if I don't kind of chase the ball all around the country. And the downside there is that you aren't guaranteeing that you're getting the exposure to the right programs, the programs that are on your list. And also time, money, your calendar over the summer, all of them, they're limited resources that you have. And so even if you have a private jet and a flight plan that looks like Taylor Swift's over her concert tour, it doesn't matter because there's only so many days in the summer that you can get in front of the coaches. So some of these are going to be limited resources. So it's really, really, really important that you have a plan. One thing that I would also say around targeting the schools that are on your list is have an open mind and leave yourself open to, yes, I want to get in front of schools X, Y, Z, but also what are the opportunities, what are the showcases that put me in front of schools that have a lot in common with those programs as well. If I decide that my target school is around 2,500 kids and it's, undergrads and it's near a city but not in a city and it's in the western half of the country, okay, great. There's, a few schools that I know of that fit that profile that I am interested in. But then also, how do I give myself a platform to find other schools that also fit what I'm looking for in that college experience? So yes, you want to have a plan. You want to absolutely target the schools that are on your list. You also want to look for opportunities where you can get broader exposure to schools like the schools that are on your list as well. And as Justin said before, don't be passive. So again, with getting recruiting exposure, when it comes to coach communication, don't be passive. You have to be proactive. Put yourself in the driver's seat. There's no like magic wand, unfortunately, that I can wave in front of your recruiting process to make sure that it ends well. But being proactive, having a plan, executing against the plan, being proactive in coach communication, being proactive at continuing to develop as a player and as a student academically on the field, that's the closest thing to a guarantee that you're going to find in recruiting is proactivity. Going out and chasing this thing is the most important thing that you can do. The other don't that I would say here is don't rely purely on large format tournaments or travel ball alone to deliver recruiting outcomes, especially at the sorts of high academic schools that attend our camps. Those large format tournaments are great. There's hundreds of coaches there. There's hundreds of travel teams. There's a lot of great competition. Your travel ball coaches are doing the best that they can with making you better and trying to get you in front of some coaches. But especially if you're targeting some of these high academic schools, those sorts of large format tournaments aren't always the most efficient for them because they could spend 8 innings watching a shortstop and think, oh, I really like that guy. And then they go talk to him and he has no interest in their school, or he's never heard of it, or he tells them his GPA and test scores, and all of a sudden they're like, all right, well, I wasted a large chunk of my day chasing this kid who I like as a player, but who isn't the student athlete that I'm looking for. And so they're looking for efficiency in their recruiting process in the same way that you as a ball player are. And so you need to make sure that you're at the places where they can get efficiency as well. So by all means, go to the World Wood Bat tournaments, go play with your travel ball team. It's a great way to get great competition, to keep getting better, to build those relationships, be on teams that matter, play in games that count, but also don't rely on them. Don't have them be the only vehicle that you have to get recruited, especially if you're targeting some of these high academic schools as well. Justin, I'd love to get your additions, thoughts, tweaks, counterpoints here as well.
Just a couple. I think you outlined that really, really well, Max. But don't assume. First, we can pause right there. We could do a whole webinar on don't assume fill in the blank. As I said earlier, assumption is a killer. In this case, don't assume that they will find you when it comes to recruiting exposure. One of my longtime pet peeves that I hear pro scouts say a lot of times because they're looking for pro players is, if you're good enough, they'll find you. That is absolute garbage in most cases when it comes to college baseball recruiting, unless you're the top 1% of the country who are that good where everyone just automatically knows about you. But one of the things I speak on in depth around the country when I give recruiting talks is the fact that, listen, only 7% of high school baseball players who want to right now go on to play college baseball, okay? One of the reasons is because they assume that if they're good enough, people will find you. And someone might have told them that somewhere, okay? That's just simply not understanding the college recruiting landscape, and also understanding that I have seen every year I've done this, kids with Division I talent not end up playing baseball because of that. They assume people will find them because they're good. Or if I just, play on this tournament, in this tournament for this travel team, it'll happen. Most of us human beings who are baseball players in high school, even Division I bound, we need to work to be found. You got to work. We've talked about being proactive, et cetera. But if you don't have the mindset of I'm going to work to win my recruiting process, best of luck to you. It's likely not going to end up how you want it to. And frankly, there's no excuse not to have that mindset, because it's really a mindset and then it's effort, right, beyond that. So the other thing I would say, Max already said, but I'm going to double down and sort of say something in a little different way or give a different perspective. Don't rely on travel baseball teams or tournaments alone to deliver recruiting process yield. Again, Max said it. He said it well. But here's what you need to know. Every year that I do this, and I advise individuals around the country, every year I might start with a family, say in the fall, and they put all their eggs in the travel team basket because the travel team said they had these connections and this percent is Division I players and blah, blah, blah. And they're woefully disappointed because it's an overpromise, underdeliver situation in over 90% of cases. Very, very rarely do travel teams deliver in all the ways that they should or they purport to? And if you have one of those, great. You're in the minority, and you've sort of won the lottery in that sense. But it is, again, don't rely on that alone. It's dangerous to do that, and if you do that, you're very likely to be extremely disappointed and maybe further away from where you started going into the summer, if that's your mindset going in. Tournaments, travel ball, et cetera, should be an ancillary bonus. You should look at any yield on the recruiting front as an ancillary bonus, if any is given from that experience. Okay, so those are a couple big ones for me.
And just to double click on that, if you're good enough, they'll find you. It's something that I know you've heard all around the country, Justin. I know I have as well in talking with families, and it is not true, right? It's no longer the case. There could have been a day when it was true, but if you're outside of that incredibly elite, like either top 5 round draft pick or going to these, massive powerhouse baseball programs, it's unlikely. But the other piece of that is, even if you are in that 1%, I would still say you need to be proactive and go attack this recruiting process, because you don't want to, quote unquote, be found in the passive voice in the recruiting process. You want to find yourself in the right place through the recruiting process.
Great point.
It's incredibly difficult to be found. And also, I don't think that being found in that passive sense, even if you are that level of talent, is the right way to kind of attack and engage this recruiting process if you're looking to get the most that you can out of it as well. All right, so now we're going to go the do's and don'ts of showcases or tournaments, and this is kind of a little bit about how to perform once you're in these spaces. So play your game. You have to trust the work that you have put in that makes you as a player. The tough thing that I see from a lot of players at our showcases, at tournaments, everywhere, is you show up at camp and you think, all right, I'm a contact line drive hitter, but today's the day that I'm going to go 5 for 3 with 6 home runs. And it's not going to go your way, right? You need to trust the work that you've put in. What is your brand as a player? What has made you successful? What has brought you there? You have to trust that hard work and be able to play that game when it is in a pressurized situation. There's a bunch of social science things that kind of touch on this, like in a highly pressurized situation, reappraising these stress-based emotions can increase your levels of performance. One of the ways that I talk to student athletes about doing that is think of all the hard work you've put in to get here. Those nerves you're feeling is your body's response to what is a high pressure situation that you are ready for because of all the work that you've put in. So it's not the time to abandon all these things that brought you there and try to play a different game just because you think it's what the coaches want to see. Oh, all coaches want to see me hit home runs, so today I'm going to try to go out and hit it 500 feet for the first time in my career. That's not going to give you success. The other do, and this is, I think, most pointed for a Headfirst showcase, but you need to make sure you are attacking the opportunity to interact and engage face-to-face with college coaches. It's not in every setting, and in fact, not very common. It's not very often in the recruiting process that you are able to directly engage face-to-face with a great list of college coaches. So take advantage of those opportunities when you do have them. At a Headfirst showcase, one thing that I tell student athletes to do is make a list of coaches to talk to for day 1 and day 2. Go through the list and highlight the ones that you're interested in talking to. Make sure you have their names and what their colors are so you can find them as easily as possible. And then also be ready to update that as well, right? If all of a sudden you hear a coach introduced and you're like, oh, I hadn't heard of Grinnell, but I kind of want to find out. I'm from Iowa. I hadn't heard about that. I need to learn a little bit more. And so be ready to update that list from day 1 to day 2 and really go out and attack those conversations. Have a plan, work the plan. And the other thing that's really, really important is as you do kind of make those introductions and have those conversations face to face, make sure you are doing your research. In this day and age, when you have a phone in your pocket, you have a smartphone, there's no excuse to walk up to a coach from a school and say, I've never heard of your school. Where is it? How big is it? What do you like? Do some research on the schools before you talk to them. Because again, as Justin mentioned before, that demonstrates interest in the program. If you walk up to a coach and you say, hey, I was just looking at your school. It's in an area of the country that I'm interested in being in. It has the major that I'm looking for. I was just looking at your record. Whatever it is, tie some of these things in to show that you've done that research before and as you talk to these college coaches to show that interest. Before we go on to the don'ts here, Justin, what do you talk to your student athletes about, your advisees about in terms of performing and that at camp performance?
Yeah, so at a showcase, very simply, I want players to understand that projectability, how a coach projects you as a player with your tools, how you play, etc., trumps perfection all the time. Okay? Projectability trumps perfection. Another way to say this is do understand that coaches most of the time often view players very different than a player views themselves at an event in terms of what's successful or not. Case in point, okay? I've sat with a lot of coaches. I've looked at players on fields at Headfirst, etc., and kids sometimes will be really pumped that they went 4 for 4. Hey, I got the results. Well, those 4 for 4 were little floozies that dropped over the shortstop's head, weren't barreled, weren't impressive swings, and you got a hit. So the player thinks, awesome, I was 4 for 4, or hey, felt pretty good about that. As opposed to the coach, the coach is sitting there saying, I'd love to see him barrel a ball. You go 0 for 4 with 4 lasers to 4 different parts of the field, that college coach will like that more than the fact that you got lucky and got a couple to drop that weren't good swings. Okay, so that's an example of how at showcases, oftentimes kids are. I talk to a kid every showcase, every single Headfirst event I'm at. There's not one that's gone by where I haven't had to tell a player, actually, feel bad about yourself if you want. These are 4 things that I saw that made me not agree with you. I think you did great for these reasons, right? So again, the lens you view yourself is very different a lot of times than the lens that a coach views you through. Also, one other do ask for feedback from coaches at an event. Headfirst is the most conducive to doing this of all of them by far. It's not even close, but do ask for feedback on what they saw within your game and how you can improve. One of the things that kids often wonder is, how do I even approach a coach, or what should I ask at an event? Well, if you ask that, right, it shows that you're A, coachable, B, you want to learn and get better, right? So you're going to take feedback and you're going to do something with that feedback. And on the receiving end, when a coach hears that question, their tendency is usually to say what they like about you first. Hey, I really like how you run the bases. You've got a really nice glove, especially going to your glove side. Need to work on your back end. Then they'll start getting into some things that are constructive criticism, et cetera. But a lot of times it opens the door for a coach to speak very positively about you first before they give that constructive criticism. Another even better way to potentially go about it is, you're about to play one of your 3 games at Headfirst. Find a couple coaches on the field or the one in your dugout and just ask them, hey, would you mind focusing on an at-bat or two? Been working on a couple things with my swing, just to give some feedback. These guys coach baseball for a living. You should get feedback from them while you're at an event that will help you get better as a player. And maybe if the opportunity arises, you could ask a coach if you're a potential fit for their program. That may or may not be able to be done at a showcase. But if the opportunity arises, or the conversation lends itself to that, certainly fine to ask. But all of this to say, you don't want to go to an event, go to a showcase, and just play. You want to play as hard as you can, but there is a back and forth. There's a conversation. There's an approach that will help you maximize the time that you spend at these events, without question.
Absolutely. And then on the don't side of things, a lot of these are pretty cleanly the other side, the flip side of the coin to the do's. So don't try to play someone else's game, as Justin and I have talked about. You don't want to try to fit a square peg in a round hole. You don't want to try to be what you think coaches want to see if it's not your game, right? You're going to be successful as a player and in the recruiting process by being authentic. Be authentic to yourself as a person, be authentic to yourself as a player as well. So don't try to do something different that day just because you think it's what you heard coaches want to see. And then also don't miss the opportunity to speak to coaches one-on-one when you're able to. In these settings where you are able to connect with them, don't veer off the last minute and go get a snack from the snack bar or anything like that, right? Take advantage of the opportunity. You're going to have some self-doubt. You're going to have some fears. You're going to have to work through them. But it's really important that when you're in these opportunities, when you have these opportunities to speak to coaches, don't miss that opportunity. Don't miss that opportunity just because it's easier to avoid the conversation and leave something on the table. Don't leave anything on the table. You want to make sure that you're taking advantage of every opportunity.
One quick ad there before we move on, Max. One big don't for me at an event: do not hand your coach your resume, a packet of information, or anything else at an event. You can do it any other time. Don't do it at an event. The number of times I've seen kids do that with good intentions and a coach roll their eyes because they've got a clipboard full of papers and they're sifting through. That is not the time, okay? It's fine if you want to have that on your person, though there's no need to in case a coach asks, but before or after an event is the time for that. It is not during a showcase. It is literally the last thing they want to see or deal with during a 2-day or whatever event.
Yeah. And then final bullet before the Q&A, the do's and don'ts of general recruiting. This is a little bit of a catch-all, and so we'll talk through some stuff. Some of it was, there are some bullets that I think we spoke a little bit about in the last webinar as well, so we'll kind of, skim through. But really, really important, and I can't emphasize it enough, one do in your recruiting process, I think, is select for overall holistic fit, school first and baseball side by side. It's not, what's the biggest name program that's going to give me the most scholarship money, right? You want to make sure that you're selecting for overall holistic school fit. That includes baseball, it includes academics, it includes school size, it includes how far away it is from your family, it includes the entire package of the college experience. And to make sure that you are selecting for overall holistic fit, you want to make sure that you're doing your school research thoroughly, you're doing campus tours, and you can't go to every college campus in the country, but you can get a good sense of them. A lot of them over the last few years have added something like the virtual tour. So, feel free to jump on some of those. And also, you absolutely want to keep an open mind about schools. If you think that you're interested in this school because of the name, but it actually turns out that it's the size of the school, the geography of the school, the majors they offer, look for those qualities in other schools as well. So be open to exploring lookalike programs. Another do, in addition to being proactive, is be patient. Justin says this all the time, something that I key off a lot. Your timing is not necessarily a coach's timing. Every player we talk to wants to be done with this process yesterday, have it signed, sealed, and delivered, be done with it, and move on to other things, right? Have that kind of stress-free senior year and be done with it. But your timing is not necessarily a coach's timing. And you are both drivers, you and the coach, student athlete and the coach are both drivers in the recruiting process, but the timing of both needs to line up. So you do need to be patient. Also, own your process. It's really important that the student athlete be in the driver's seat. Mom, dad, uncle, cousin, brother, whoever it is, sister, whoever it is that might be advising and be a really good role model, be a good voice of reason in a student athlete's ear through this process. You can be in the car. You can give your opinions when they're solicited. You can give some advice. You can help talk through some of those thorny or stickier questions. But it's absolutely crucial that the student athlete be in the driver's seat of this process. It is their process. The overall holistic fit and college experience that they're looking for is going to be theirs for the 4 years. And then the lifetime after that, they're affiliated with this program. So it's really important that student athletes take responsibility for your recruiting process. Don't let somebody else do it, whether it's a parent or a sibling or a cousin or a coach or an advisor who's been through this process hundreds of times. You have to own your process. And then finally, very tactfully, eye contact, firm handshake, and respect for authority. It's crucial. One of the things that coaches do look for is they want to see who you are, and they want to get that firm handshake, that eye contact when you do meet them face to face. And then respect for authority, meaning, are you coachable? Do you engage with the people around you? Are you respectful of your parents? Do you make mom carry the bag from the car in the parking lot as opposed to carrying your own gear? What are these things? What's your relationship like to the people around you? And one of the ways that they can get to that and they want to see is that eye contact and the firm handshake. Just anything on the do's here that you would add?
Yeah, just to extend what you just said in that last bullet point, having been a college coach, remember there is a limited opportunity that all college baseball coaches have to determine whether or not they want a player for their program. Yes, they're evaluating talent on the field through video, et cetera, but they're also always evaluating their engagement with you. And if they're talking to you and you're looking at birds out the window, et cetera, or they're shaking your hand and you give what I call the dead fish and it's not firm, that's a little glimpse into what's this kid like, what's he all about, what makes him tick. Respect for authority. Max gave one example. Let me give you another. I'd sit in my office as a college coach many times over, right? And the player I'm recruiting is doing a great job holding to the 70-30 rule, where my rule for my advisees, where he's communicating 70% of the time or more on his own with the coach. But mom or dad might ask a question. Mom says, hey, can you explain your financial aid packaging, because it looks like it's got loans involved and it's different from Bridgewater State down the street from Shenandoah. The worst thing you can do in that moment as a player is roll your eyes. And I've had players sit across from me in my office and go, Mom, what are you doing? Immediately when they show that lack of respect, Max mentioned mom carrying the bag from the dugout, which is ridiculous. But when you can't show respect to the person who bore you life, you're not going to show me respect as a college coach, and I'm not going to recruit you. There's always someone just as good or better. Remember that, okay? So that last bullet there as an overarching do, right? Those are three examples of ways that you can show something about yourself more than your grades that are on a transcript and what you do on a field ability-wise, which are very important, but so are these little things that really aren't so little. And then I think we're ready for some don'ts here, right, Max? I'm going to finish it out here. All right, so
Yes,
couple of my big don'ts before Q&A. Don't allow D1-itis to blind you. I might have alluded to it in our first webinar. I certainly talk about D1-itis a lot. It's a fictitious disease. It's actually really real, which is going through this process with blinders on, where the only thing that matters to you in terms of the college search is playing Division I baseball. Work to cure that if you have it. It doesn't mean you should just give up on D1 baseball, but it means there is more to the process than just a level, as we have talked about now in much detail over two webinars. Do not compare your process to others, especially with timing. I alluded to this earlier a little bit with regards to, okay, I am this player and I'm better than that player who's got these numbers, and he has an offer that he just got last week, so I should be getting one soon. That is a slippery slope to insanity. It will get you nowhere. It will get you below nowhere. Don't do it. Tune that out, okay? So don't. One of my favorite quotes, comparison is a thief of joy. Not only is it going to be unproductive, you're going to go stark raving crazy if all you do is compare yourself to where everyone else that you know is in this process. Don't be a couch potato. Be passive. We've talked about proactivity, which is literally the antithesis of being a couch potato, sitting on the couch waiting for the world to come to you. Don't do it. Don't be that guy, okay? Don't be one of the 92 to 93% in the country who only care about baseball and not school. We just talked about D1-itis, but even extend beyond D1-itis to just baseball, okay? Baseball is great. Baseball is fun. You're on this webinar, or your parents are, because you want to play college baseball, and that's awesome. But it shouldn't be your whole process, right? So don't be one of everyone that just says, I want to play baseball, I don't care where. And guess what? Anyone can avoid that mindset if they want to. Anyone, no matter what kind of a student they are, can still have a goal of, I want to go to the best school I can for me and use baseball to help me get there if I can, and look at baseball as the cherry on top, or maybe that gateway to or through admissions in some cases at great schools. Okay, a couple more. Don't fear rejection. Okay, it is going to happen. I say this all the time. It sucks to be rejected. We all know that, right? It's not fun, but it happens in life. And in the recruiting process, it will happen to some degrees. There will be a coach or coaches that will reject you, that don't want you. There will be an admissions office or admissions offices that won't accept you. Embrace it, expect it, deal with it, and know that acceptance by college coaches and colleges will happen as well. Acceptance awaits if you are proactive and persist, okay? And are patient, right? And Max talked about that up there in the dues. That's a really, really important one. If you, it's hard to be patient, right? Because you want answers, as Max said, but it's really important that you don't throw in the towel, right? And that when you're rejected, you get back up on the horse and you keep going. In other words, develop thick skin throughout this process and don't let a few rejections derail you. Lastly, don't have regrets or leave anything on the table, okay? Control those things that you can in this process, your effort, right? Your approach, your body language, your hustle, all those things, and push yourself to maximize the college options that you have by working as hard as you can in the classroom, the weight room, the field, etc. Don't be the regret guy. What's the regret guy? The regret guy is the guy that gets to, say, the early, middle of the summer after their junior year, and a coach sees them play that's a school on their list that really likes them, and they get this great relationship rapport going on, and then the coach says, hey, I need to get your transcript through 3 years to take to admissions, to get an admissions pre-read to see if we can be green-lighted to recruit you. And the kid does that, and then the coach comes back and says, hey, you're a little bit short grade-wise. Sorry, we can't help you even with our poll. You don't want to be the regret guy who looks at that and goes, man, I wish I would have, I should have, I could have avoided this because I didn't give a 10 out of 10 effort. Okay, so how do you avoid regrets? We all have them in life. They're part of life as well. And you can't totally avoid them. But in the recruiting process, you can look at yourself in the mirror and tell yourself that you gave everything you got, and wherever the chips fall from there, you feel good about because you put everything towards that end.
Absolutely, and I think that so that bullet on don't fear rejection and don't have any regrets or leave anything on the table, these are, I think, emotionally some of the toughest to deal with for a 16, 17-year-old kid going through this process. Because it does. This recruiting process, you're going to hear no, and it's going to be a vulnerable process. You are putting yourself out there with the dream that you have to continue playing at a highly competitive school, playing the highest level baseball that you can, and you are making yourself vulnerable to rejection, vulnerable to the judgments of others in this space. And so one response to that is, well, you can always leave yourself some excuses in the tank and say, well, I could have done that, but I didn't do this or that because I didn't really want to, right? You don't want to be that guy. You don't want to leave anything on the table. You have to go out and do everything that you can to chase this dream, even though and because it does leave you vulnerable and in a spot where you will hear no. You could hear no from your dream school, but you have to still put yourself out there. All right, we are heading to the Q&A. We have about 10 minutes or so for the Q&A, I think. I know that we're already a little bit over, but we can take about 10 minutes or so and answer some questions live on the air. To send a question in the GoToWebinar toolbar, you should see a little questions tab. Type it in there. I'm going to be compiling them. We've already got some great ones that have come in. I'll be compiling them and phrasing them out to either Justin or myself. Justin, as those questions start to come in and as I start to kind of gather them, could you talk through, I know that you mentioned this in the last webinar as well, but the video eval offer and what that is and how they can send you some stuff?
Sure. So if you weren't tuned into the last webinar, one thing that I am offering anyone who is listening to this webinar up until June 1st, so basically the next 2.5 weeks, is a free 25-minute verbal evaluation of you, right? So basically, you see on your screen there, if you send me some basic video clips, I don't need anything fancy, just something where I can determine your skill, your swing, ground balls, pitches, whatever. I will review and set up a time with you. We can get on and I can give you that feedback in terms of, what I think of your current ability, how you might project, so on and so forth. So if you email me again, as you see on my email on the screen there before June 1st, we can set that up happily with no strings attached, no pressure, no anything for my program. That said, if there is interest in my program, where my program does begin, my college advising program is with an evaluation. So, I would need to see video clips anyway. But regardless of that, happy to schedule a time to go over that.
Awesome. Thank you, Justin. And I know we mentioned this last time, but one of the key places to start in this process is by getting a good evaluation, getting a third-party honest assessment of here's where you stack up now, here's your kind of projectability and the path to keep growing as a player. And this is a good opportunity to be able to get that take and kind of see where you might fit into the recruiting landscape. Some really good questions come in. I'm going to start with this one. Is it too early for this? The question's about a freshman, but I think we can kind of say freshman or sophomore. Is it too early for a freshman or a sophomore to start the process? There are these rules around recruiting, conversations and contact with coaches. So is it too early for a freshman or a sophomore to start the process, start going to some showcases after your freshman year, after your sophomore year? Justin, when you're talking through the timing of this, what's your kind of general rule here?
Yeah. So, it's a good question. Many incorrectly believe that the recruiting process begins with getting exposure at camps or communicating with coaches, et cetera. But it should start far before that, right? I.e. freshman, sophomore year. It's not too early to, quote, engage in the process freshman or sophomore year. It just requires a different focus than, that you might have going into your junior year, et cetera. So you're not working on college applications. You're not focused on college list, or shouldn't be as a freshman, but you can develop an academic and athletic foundation, very simply, right? So get better as a student, improve and polish your study habits to reach your potential. I have seen a lot of smart kids with poor study habits. Change those. Learn to grind at an early age so that it can help you down the road. Begin researching and visiting colleges, okay? You don't have to go crazy with it as a freshman and sophomore, but anytime you're in an area that has schools, big and small, medium, urban, rural, et cetera, I tell my clients all the time, if you're going to be in an area, let me know and I'll help you map that out. I actually helped a family from California a couple of days ago map out 4 days around the family from California is going to Headfirst in Long Island. They're going to have 4 days, and so we're going to saw off some schools to see. That is engaging in your process, but also not sending a bunch of emails and video before you're ready to send it, and also with new NCAA rules that Max referenced as of a little over a year ago, there's not that pressure, or shouldn't be anymore, to do that so early. Athletically, diet nutrition is the start of the process. It's the hub of the wheel. Everything you accomplish as a player is based on how you eat. We'll leave it at that for now, but let's just say I go in a lot more depth with those that I work with because it's the most grossly neglected. Weight room performance training, learn how to train, become physical, get bigger, faster, stronger. I don't know freshmen and sophomores, maybe a couple, that don't need to get bigger, faster, and stronger. I work with a couple absolute manimals, but most need to, right? And then get an objective evaluation. Max just said it. It's never too early to do that. Know where you stand when you're a freshman, when you're a sophomore. Attack your weaknesses as a ball player. Make them, those weaknesses, below average, get them average or better, and take those above average strengths and make them excellent, right? Turn those strengths into college tools, in other words. So lastly, quickly, extracurriculars, okay? 4 buckets. Work, 1, internship or shadowing, 2, 3, volunteer, or 4, specialized online coursework. Any of those things you can begin as a freshman or sophomore. In fact, it's a good idea to do more than just be a great student and play baseball at any point. And so you don't need to try to do 15 things as a freshman, but you should be thinking about what could I maybe do in any one of those 4 buckets in conjunction with making myself a better student and a better player.
Yeah, and I think a couple things that I would kind of double down on from what Justin said. One is the best thing you can be doing for your recruiting at any given time, whether you're a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, whatever it is to keep getting better as a player and to maximize what you're doing in the classroom with standardized tests, academically, et cetera. Now, a little more context came in on this question, Justin, which is, this person happens to be a 6'5", physically mature freshmen, which is a great spot to be in. So, the right time, right. The right time to showcase is when you are ready as a player to showcase. So that's going to be different for different players. If you're a 6'5" freshman who's, throwing 87, yeah, sounds like you're probably ready to start showcasing and getting on some coaches' radars. If you aren't that, then you do still have time to get bigger, faster, stronger, physically mature, all these things in the process. So you don't have to go out there as a freshman and start getting showcase exposure. The best thing you can do is to keep developing on the field and in the classroom to keep as many doors open as possible. The other thing that I sometimes talk about with players is when you should start showcasing also does somewhat depend on what schools you're targeting. If you're looking at the Stanfords of the world, yeah, their process is going to move earlier than an Ivy League school or than a Division III school. And so you're going to need to, if Stanford is your dream school, you're ready to showcase in front of Stanford, you're going to need to get out there earlier than a player who is targeting, a NESCAC school. Because their recruiting process at Stanford is going to move a lot sooner and a lot more quickly than it is at some of these other programs. So that's the other piece of the puzzle that I would fit in is, what are the schools you're targeting? Are you ready? Are the schools that you're looking for starting to recruit your grad year? All these are really important. There also is benefit to getting some early experience in these kinds of settings so that when the time comes around, when you are really like, it's your turn on the mic, it's your turn in the spotlight, you have some experience in some of these more highly pressurized situations so that you're that much more comfortable when the time comes.
Just to add on to Max's awesome point there, right? We're talking about freshmen, 6'5". I don't know if you remember Evan Kravitz. My children called him the Great Wall of China, 6'8" left-handed pitcher from Miami. Okay, I saw him pitch in Louisville. He's in AAA now. I started working with him at the end of his freshman year. It was a different process, right? So as I said at the outset, we customize our program and our advisement to the individual. And if we don't, we're not good advisors at all, because that kid was different. He needed to go get seen. He needed to do things that 99% of freshmen don't, because he was a 1%er. He went to Rice. He was drafted in the 5th round by the Reds. He's in Louisville now with an unbelievably filthy changeup, by the way, Max. You'd love it. And could see the show at some point this year, right? He's pitching that well. So that's a very different trajectory. It's an outlier, et cetera. But I think, Max, you did a great job there of outlining all those different components.
Yeah. And then I think one final question we're going to get to is, how frequently should you update a coach? What kind of new information do you want to provide with each new contact? We touched on this a little bit in that section around the do's and don'ts of coach communication. And one of the things you do want to do, obviously, is be proactive, be persistent. The thing you don't want to do is pester. And this question kind of touches on that, getting in that sweet spot, which, again, as you mentioned, is going to be different for each player, for each program, et cetera. But Justin, are there any kind of any heuristics, any general guidelines that you give to your players, depending on, let's say for a sophomore, a junior, because it's going to depend on the time of year and the grad year as well. But are there any kind of guidelines that you work from?
Yeah, I think it's very different. And the new NCAA rule, new as of a year ago, has helped. Sophomores are asking me, what do I do right now? I'm basically saying hold tight for the most part, tweet some things, okay? Respond to camp invites, generally speaking. But in the second half of July, nearing August 1st, when coaches could actually talk to you at the Division level, one level, that's when you'll really start your outreach. We'll begin building a preliminary college list after sophomore year, and then get ready to start that marketing then. Now, juniors, between January 1 and June 15th, a period that we're still in for another month, okay? Generally speaking, and again, I hate speaking in generalizations, and everyone's different, as Max said, and we keep hammering the table on that because it's true, right? I've gone away from this exact advice even in the last 2 days, right, with certain players. But generally the cadence, I like to be an excuse, quote unquote, to contact a college coach every couple weeks, okay? Certainly between now and June 15th, every couple weeks. And the reasons for that, Max sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, right? There can be a lot of different things you should email about, but you shouldn't send them the kitchen sink, tons of information yet. There will likely come a point in the summer, if a coach likes you, where they say, send it all to me. And in one email, you're sending your transcript through 3, your updated skills video, your season highlights, your test scores, and on we go. Your Twitter handle, your player sports recruits handle, all these things in one. But not yet, right? So an excuse to contact could just be subject line test score. It could be end of junior year grades. It could be, I was talking to a kid in Maryland today. They've won 8 out of their last 10 games. They're in playoffs. They're unbelievable. Send a quick note about what the team's done in the last couple games and a couple pitching clips, right? So season clips. Summer schedule is a good one. A couple weeks from now, as you get ready to the summer, where you're going to be. Are you? And as I said earlier, in the email with a question, if you can, Coach, I see you're going to be at Headfirst at this event, at that event. Are there any others on my schedule, tournament-wise, et cetera, that you're going to be at? So that cadence should be really ongoing, roughly 2 weeks. Now, there's some that if you're in an unbelievable groove, I had a kid who was hitting everything in sight like it was a beach ball. I was like, every week you're going to update. They're going to want to see it. And I mean, he was hitting bombs. He's making web gym plays. It was like crazy, right? And I'm like, you keep the cadence more frequent, but with little hits, because it's not going to annoy him. I click on that as a coach. I'm like, whoa, kid just caught a ball going into foul Torrey and got suplexed by the stands and fell into it and caught the ball. That needs to be seen. You don't wait on that for 2 weeks, right? You hit while the iron's hot, but generally once every couple weeks, going at least through June 15th, and then really can go through the summer as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Justin. And that's going to bring us to the end of the Q&A. However, this is certainly not your first, last, only chance to ask us any questions. So I left this up so that you could take down our email address, our phone number, as well as Justin's email address and website. Stay in touch with us on social media. Feel free to reach out with any questions. I know there's a couple questions that I'm going to follow up on. Either a colleague or I will follow up on tomorrow. So stay tuned for that as well, Tom. Thank you for that great question. That's just a little bit more personalized. So with that, I'll leave you and say thank you so much for attending this webinar on behalf of everyone at Headfirst. Thank you for taking some time out of your Tuesday evening. Justin, thank you for spending some time with us as well.
Thank you, Max.
We look forward to the next
always,
one.
Buddy.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we'll see you all somewhere down the line. Thank you.
Bye-bye.